Hi, so today I'm going to talk about the differences in pork loin and pork tenderloin, and we're going to cook them both on an Oklahoma Joe's offset barbecue smoker, and I'm going to show you how I prepare these meats. They're very inexpensive, they're easy to come by, and they're really, really good. And I'm going to show you the difference. So let's get this going. It's fall in Oklahoma. And a big cool front comes through today when I'm cooking these. It drops about 20 degrees during this day. I'm in short sleeves now, but later I'll be wearing a jacket. And there's my Oklahoma Joe's offset smoker that I've restored. Deer season starts in just a few days. This is my favorite time of year to barbecue because it's nice and cool out. And today we're going to be doing something called smoke roasting, which means we're going to use a really high temperature and roast the cuts because pork loin doesn't have a lot of collagen in it. It's not a tough cut. It's very tender. So it doesn't need to sit in that smoker for a very long time. In fact, if you smoke it for too long, you're going to dry it out. So we're going to cook this fairly quickly today at about 325 to 425 degrees in a really hot smoker oven environment. I call it smoke roasting. You can do it with lots of tender cuts like chicken or fish or things like that that don't need to sit in there and break down the collagen over a long period of time. So we'll be smoke roasting these pork loins and pork tenderloins. So I've got my charcoal chimney going now. I used a little bit of cooking oil and some crushed paper towels. That's what I like to start the charcoal with. Okay, now see how it says loin right there? Half loin roast. That's the USDA term for this muscle from the hog. And this one says tenderloin, one word. That is a completely different muscle group in the hog. People confuse them all the time. But I want to make that very clear in this video. And now I'll show you where they come from on the hog. Draw a pig real quick here. So the loin muscle, it starts behind the shoulder and goes all the way back to the sirloin or the ham at top. And it's a long tubular muscle that sits way up on top of the back of the hog. If you can feel beside your spine and your back, there's two tubular muscles that run all the way up your back on either side of your spine. Those are your lumbar muscles. Those are the same muscle group as the loin muscle in the hog. It's the same muscle group as the strip steak or ribeye comes from in the cow, or it's where the back strap comes from a deer, if you're familiar with any of those other cuts. So that's what the loin is, way up on top, high on the hog, which is where all tender cuts are. Now underneath that loin, underneath the spine, inside the cavity of the hog, is a very, very small tubular muscle called the tenderloin. And that's where it sits. And I wanted to draw this for you so you can see the difference. And I'm going to draw a little bit more here in a second to kind of show you from a different angle how you can see where those come from and how their analogs match up to those of beef. When you talk about the loin and the tenderloin of it like on a T-bone. So if you were to cut this hog right down the middle just like this through both those muscle groups and through the spine, then you would cut right through the vertebrae. So here's the vertebrae I'm drawing. It's got that dorsal process on the top and the two transverse processes on the side, those big arms. And there's meat that lays right there on top and right on the bottom. So that top piece of meat on either side of the spine is the loin muscle, right there. That's where your New York strip or your ribeye comes from. And that's the tenderloin underneath. In fact, if you were to go ahead and slice this right down the middle like this with a saw, you'd have a T-bone over here in a cow. But that's the loin, that's the tenderloin. We're cooking them boneless today, of course, but two completely different cuts. Now, when I prep either of these meats, I don't do hardly anything to them except for season them. There's no real trimming, in my opinion, to do. They're super tender, so they don't need any sort of marinade or long brine. You can buy them already marinated often, and they taste really good, but you don't need that marinade or a brine to make them very tender. They're already just inherently tender cuts of meat, which is why we get to cook them at a fast, high temperature today and come out with a great product. I'm using Payne County Rust. It's my firstborn seasoning. It's a great all-purpose barbecue rub. I use it on beef all the time, but I also like to use it on chicken and pork from time to time. Even though I have specific seasonings now in my seasoning line for those cuts, I still go back to Rust often. It's my favorite. So we'll season up a couple big loin roasts. Loins are actually about 30 or 35 inches long. These are partial loin roasts. And there's those two little tenderloins. We'll also throw a couple Polish sausages on today because there'll be extra space on the grill. So that charcoal chimney's burning hot now, and those two pieces of oak that I put on top have preheated. And so they're up to the point to where they're going to be good for smoking. You can see that wind has really picked up now. So it's a whole chimney full of charcoal because I want a roughly 350 degree fire. That's about how much it takes for me for this smoker to get that kind of temperature. And then I'll be adding a lot more wood than I normally would for like a 225 or 250 degree fire. But that's really easy to figure out, and you have a lot of control with your damper on your chimney stack too with these smokers. So just like every time, you're probably tired of seeing this, but I'm always going to show you. I always clean off my grates with a poly brush. I always spray them down with cooking oil or pan release and then polish them off with a paper towel. It's about all these smokers need in the way of maintenance if you use them regularly. And this time, I'm going to go ahead and spray my firebox down with oil also. It's some good management. It keeps that paint or it keeps the metal rather from rusting underneath. That oil polymerizes on there. So now we got it up to 350 degrees on the left or so, and about 410 it looks like on the right. This thing is screaming hot, and it's ready for smoke roasting. There's my trusty digital instant read thermometer with a little wired probe on it, and I'll put that in one of the tenderloins so we can tell when they get to the exact temperature we want them on. Remember, my internal temperature charts are on PayneCountyRust.com. You can go to the charts and resources tab and download all the charts that I've made for you guys. They're all free, of course, and they have all the internal temperatures for everything. I like to take tenderloin to about 135. This is right at about 130 right now, so it's time to barbecue sauce it up and let it finish. You can see the ash blowing through the air there from my fire because that north wind has really gotten strong out there. Thank goodness it's going past me and not landing on the product. So there's my Hogsbane barbecue sauce I'm using. It's a good, sweet Kansas City style sauce. It goes great with pork. And I like to glaze these up and let them come on up to temperature with a glaze on there. Take about 5 or 10 more minutes. I'll do one more test for temperature just to make sure it's exactly 135 degrees, and it is. And we'll pull those tenderloins off. It's just the lightest pink in the middle at 135 degrees. I guess I'm supposed to tell you that there are USDA guidelines for safe temperatures, internal temperatures that are, I think, 160 or 165 for pork products. I'd never do that. It is a much drier product, and I consider this a very safe temperature to eat pork product at, especially roasts like this. It's been about an hour and a half now. I pulled those pork tenderloins, by the way, off at about 45 minutes. And these pork loins are going to take a lot longer. They're a lot denser meat, a lot larger roasts. So I'm going to spray these guys at an hour and a half here, just to keep from getting too crispy, especially in that hot smoke roast environment. And then when they get up, we're at 140 degrees right now. They get up to about 140 degrees. I do the same thing to these that I did to that tenderloin. I like to get some barbecue sauce on there and let it glaze and tack up on there as it finishes up to 145 degree internal temperature. That is my favorite internal temperature for pork loin, is 145. And you'll see how juicy these are, and they won't be even the littlest bit pink in the middle. The only pink on the pork loin you'll see is from the smoke ring. I consider them done at 145 degrees, but if you want to take it up higher, be my guest. You can take them up to 160. It'll still be a good product, just a little drier. So we are on the highest end of 144 degrees at this point. These are perfectly done. It's time to pull these out. There's lots of ways you can serve pork loin. My very favorite way is to take pork loin and slice it really thin and make a sandwich out of it and serve it on a very well crusted toasted bun, a real crunchy bun. That's the way I like to do it, but you can also slice this into pork chops. It's the same meat that a pork chop is, a smoked pork chop steak. But I'm going to show you how I like to make sandwiches. First part is I melt a stick of butter in the microwave, and I add a couple tablespoons of the barbecue rub we used to make a compound butter. That's what I'm going to use to coat the bottom side of the buns that I'm going to toast. Kind of tastes like an Italian garlic bread or whatever your barbecue seasoning is. My barbecue seasoning has a lot of garlic in it. And so when you butter the bottom side of the bun with that compound garlicky, smoky barbecue butter, it really, really makes a good crunchy crust on the bottom. And that's very important, I think, for a sandwich. And I like to do them on an electric griddle because you can do them all at once. You just pull the electric griddle out and you don't have to do it in batches in a frying pan. So if you have an electric griddle, this is a great way to use it. And then in not too long, I turn it up the highest setting. In not too long, you can see the crust that we got on the bottom there. Really good, crunchy, garlicky barbecue crust on these buns. And that's the way I think a barbecue sandwich should be. That's the perfect place to put your meat and your sauce down. It won't make your bun all soggy. So we'll get back to that in a minute. Here's one of those tenderloins. And like I say, I cooked them to a medium. You'll see the lightest pink in the middle. You'll see some pink on the outside where the smoke ring is. That is a perfectly done pork tenderloin. Very soft meat. You can see all the moisture that's still in there. You can eat these with a plastic spoon. They're very, very soft. It's one of the more tender cuts that I know of. And so I like to cut them into little half-inch medallions like this and serve them like this with a side of sauce. I do not put this on a sandwich. I like to use pork loin for the sandwich meat. But you can see how soft these are. You have to cut them very delicately with a knife, and you can bite right through it. I mean, it's absolutely tender. I think you'll really like this meat if you've never had it, or you've had pork loin and thought it was maybe tenderloin. It's easy to get confused when people call them the same thing. And then here's its big brother, the pork loin. You can see how much darker it is because it sat on that smoker. I think 2.5 hours is how long we cooked today before I got that internal temperature I wanted. Depends on how big your roast is and how hot you keep your fire. But it's usually about anywhere between 2 hours and 2 hours and 45 minutes. And then you can see that perfectly white, moist meat in the middle there with a good smoke ring. That's a 145 degree pork loin right there. And what I like to do is shave it as thin as I possibly can manage. That's about as thin as I can get with this big chef's knife. If you have a meat slicer or an electric knife, you can get it even thinner. But I would say get this as thin as you possibly can. And that makes, I think, for the best eating on a sandwich. This is one of my favorite barbecue sandwich meats there is. I prefer it over pulled pork, and I even prefer it over brisket. I like those meats a lot, but when I'm making sandwiches, this is what I want. You see how soft that is? Very tender, very moist meat. It's got that great bark on the outside that we got through the barbecue. Even though we only cooked it 2.5 hours, it's got a great bark on it. That sauce and all that dry rub just make this a great sandwich meat. Serve a lot of people, and it's not very expensive at all. It's one of the cheaper cuts. It goes on sale all the time. So there is our sandwich dressing. And then, like I said earlier, you can also cut this into half-inch steaks, more like pork chops, and serve it with a knife and fork if you like. And there's our pork chops. So here's how I like to build these sandwiches. They're very simple. Heavily toasted bun, and then a mountain of that really thinly sliced 145 degree medium pork loin sliced up there on top, and then cover it with a good sweet Kansas City barbecue sauce. That's a killer sandwich. There's a barbecue restaurant in my hometown that is famous for those. And you can do other things to them. You can put coleslaw on top. The most I usually do is I get the mandolin out sometimes and really thinly slice a red onion, really thinly slice whole dill pickles and put them on top also. And that goes really well with this also. I'm doing one of those right now here. Those are great sandwiches. I hope you guys try this sometime. It's not a meat that a lot of people barbecue. A lot of restaurants do throughout Oklahoma. You'll find a pork loin sandwich, and often, like I say, they'll call it a tenderloin sandwich. That's a great sandwich meat. So there's everything. The big pork loin roasted back, tenderloin on the left, the pork chops in the middle with that Polish sausage we threw on, and a couple of big sandwiches. And you can even make a huge sandwich if you're really feeling hungry. There's one I built. So that's how I cook pork loin. That's how I cook pork tenderloin. Again, you can take it to whatever temperature you feel safe at. I always take pork tenderloin to 135. I take pork loin to 145. I've never had a problem with it, but I think I'm supposed to tell you that you're supposed to take, I think, pork up to 160 or 165 in the middle. I just never do. So anyway, please pick up a pork loin. You can cook it on the grill just as easily. You don't have to smoke it. You can cook it in the oven, things like that. But this is a barbecuing channel, and I just wanted to show you how I make pork loin and pork tenderloin and how I build pork loin sandwiches. So thank you guys for watching. We'll see you next time.